And our Road to Greatness guest in with us in the Asaase studio this morning, well, I mean, you could say he needs absolutely no introduction, but just for the sake of argument, just so we realize what we are talking about on the level of greatness, give him a little bit of an introduction. Professor Ken Attafuah is the Executive Secretary of Ghana's National Identification Authority. He has held many senior positions at home and abroad, from Executive Secretary of the National Reconciliation Commission in Ghana to Director of Operations and Chief Investigator on the Commission of Human Rights and Administrative Justice, SHRAJ, where he later served as Director of Anti-Corruption and Public Education. He's been a UN Technical Advisor to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Liberia, Management Consultant to the United Nations Mission in Liberia, UNMIL, and also served as a Human Rights Commissioner in British Columbia, Canada, where he had part of his legal training. He started out as a crime prevention policy advisor and analyst at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in West Vancouver, and was later an adjudicator with the Canadian Immigration and Refugee Board. He is now chairman of the Ghana Refugee Board. He was the founding dean of the Faculty of Law and the founding director of the William Oforiatta Institute of Integrity at Central University in Accra, and lectured as Associate Professor of Governance and Leadership at the Ghana Institute of Management and Professional Studies, which we know more commonly as GIMPA. He comes garlanded with awards which keep on running in, more of which later on we hope in our conversation. But we have to say, first of all, Akwaba again to the Road to Greatness, Professor Ken Attafuah. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Nanaya, and good morning, and Kudonto.
Yeah, and we're so pleased to have you here with us. We know you've managed some rather straitened personal circumstances to be here this morning. You've had a bereavement in the family, and you haven't let it put you off. You've still managed to come and join us. We're very deeply grateful to have you back again in the Kweku Sechiado studio. But
it's a pleasure. It's great to be in Kweku Sechiado studio.
Always,
my dear friends.
Always a pleasure to see you. Now, of course, we will talk a great deal, I think, about your current role as Executive Secretary of the National Identification Authority, but we're all also in awe of the background of the man, where you're coming from, because anybody seeing the polished gentleman sitting before us today might say, this is a person who had their way eased for them through life to get to the position of eminence that they now hold. For you, the road to greatness and the eminent position that you hold now, how smooth was that road, starting out from your very beginnings in the Ashanti region? Jeche Pramso, is that right?
Well, the word smooth is what I pick on first. First of all, I'm the least in the house of Israel. I'm the last born of a set of four sets of twins.
Four sets of twins
who were peasant farmers from Draso in the Asante district, Asante South municipality. I grew up as the last born, and that meant that I learned a lot of patience, a lot of tolerance, a lot of waiting my turn. My mother and my father had 4 sets of twins. The first 3 sets were females. My twin brother and I were the last born who were males. My twin brother died when we were 36. I am 63. So I've sort of, by the grace of God, I've turned the numbers around, 36 to 63. And every day I count my blessings. I attended Draso Local Authority Primary School, Presby Primary School. In a class of 36, 35, I was always 33, 32. I was at the bottom end of it. My twin brother was always in the first 5 until class 4, when a teacher said, "Mihun tafwa bakwa ben na baako abon sei na usua na usua obi hu. That is to say, I've never encountered twins, a situation where one is so sharp and the other is so daft, and that if you apply yourself, you will make it. So Teacher Amankwa encouraged me and gave me those Bible storybooks that were stories of contrast, the Cain and Abel and David and Goliath and those kinds of stories, Jacob and Esau. They fascinated me. So I paid attention, and he gave me these books over a Thursday and said, if by Monday you can read them, I'll let you keep them. And my sister Felicia, who is a retired teacher, but she was about 4 years ahead of me, taught me to read. And that was my first lesson in discipline and reading. And it was by a woman. And I learned to read, and by the following Monday, I could formulate a sentence in English, and the teacher kept his word.
Literally over the weekend, you learned how to read and formulate sentences.
Yes. I believe that my first sentence in English was, I did it myself, even though it wasn't true.
And you did.
My sister helped me to do it, but that's what she encouraged me to read. And so, yeah, Teacher Mankwa kept them. But I was interested more in the outline. You could draw the figures. You could trace the outline. You steal a little bit of kerosene from your mom. You spread it on the sheet. It becomes transparent. You draw the outline. Then you could color it. I didn't like school. School was a place of tyranny and oppression. Little boys got bullied. I was little. I'm still little. And I never enjoyed school until I got to the upper levels of secondary school. But primary school was a place of pain and tyranny. My twin brother was good. He was good at soccer, and he could dribble, and the big boys would chase him down and knock him down. And so I fought in his defense, and I learned to be a defender from very early on. And I think it's one of the things that also shaped my career going into law. Becoming a lawyer. My mom was tall, beautiful, regal, strong, dark, and a bit of a bully. My father was soft-spoken, little man, gentle, wise, and a bit of an introvert, but a man who was widely consulted by the big people. And he was the Udikru of Oda Akrofonso, that is the original Achim Oda near Prasukuma, Afusu, Finswa Iribi area there. And my mom from the royal family, or Yoko royal family of Jaso. I think they influenced me considerably. Every day I see my mom in me, every day I see my dad in me. There are moments I look I catch a reflection of me and I can see my father. And every day I see my mom. My mom has been gone 12 years. My father has been gone since 1984, when I was 24. As I said, I'm 63. On November 9th, I'll be 64. And every day, I also remember my twin brother, who was calmer, wiser, gentler, and taller. He was tall. But it was my uncle, my mom's big brother, who set me on the path to education in the proper sense of the word. After my sister Felicia, who taught at Nkawe for many years and now lives at Abuakwa, taught me to read. I moved from being number 33 and 32 and all of that at the tail end of the class
of the stream
to 5th in the second term. And then by the next term, I moved to 5th, then I moved to 3rd, and then I moved to 1st. And as they say, the rest is history.
Indeed.
So when, and I remember the first time I was first in a class, when the roll is called, and you line up. And for the first time, I was the first person with nobody standing to my left. I was the one standing to, in the first in the queue. So that was a trajectory I followed, and I went to secondary school. There are lessons about that also, about even being able to move from the back positions to the front positions. I think that we tend to, a lot of teachers develop entrenched positions, that this student is a break. This person cannot be beaten.
You get pigeonholed very early and put in a box.
Until we had a change, when there was a new teacher, Miss Amuzu came, and Miss Amuzu was not wedded to the structure that had been built by previous teachers. And then I was able to move from third to first. It also has implications for how we run organizations, how we run our lives, how open-minded we become about people and about situations and circumstances, that we give people a chance and not get wedded to what has already crystallized too much. So that's one thing. But then I went to secondary school because my parents couldn't have afforded, as I said earlier, peasant farmers. It was hand to mouth. But my uncle, who was an accountant at the Cocoa Marketing Board, was traveling to Kumasi, and his vehicle broke down at Atridia just before Draso. So he came over to spend the night. And the next morning, when he went to the loo, he was given for toilet roll. We didn't have daily graphic, which was the next best thing. It was the exercise book, old exercise book. So you soften it with a bit of water, and then that becomes your tissue. So my uncle was given this centerfold, and while he was on the loo, he read it. He saved half of it and came back and said, "Whose handwriting is this?" And they said, "That's mine." And he said, "This boy should go to secondary school." Literally. So on his way back from Kumasi, he brought common entrance, past questions, and
materials for you to study.
So and enrolled my twin brother and I passed. And by the time I got the admission letter to Prempeh College, we couldn't afford the deposit because, and he had an accident. He was going to be made a chief of Draso, and he had an accident at Ejoso and was at Agogo Hospital with his foot hoisted in a POP, and all that drama meant that there was no money to go.
The chances of going to Prempeh College are non-existent, but you managed to get past that because you went to the local secondary school.
Exactly. I got to Jachi Pramso Secondary School, which is where Honorable Aduchum, the Minister for Education, the year I left Form 5, I think he entered Form 1.
Wow.
My classmate was Mr. Hayford Attafuah, who's a lawyer and head of
National Pensions Regulatory
Authority. He was a school prefect, and I was his assistant.
Wow.
And many others. But the point is, I ended up at Jachi Pramso the same year, and then choosing St. Peter's to go do sixth form at St. Peter's was the most ambitious decision I ever made in my life. I think at the time my mates thought that I was, the word they used was hoo-hoo. We hoo-hoo.
You were hoo-hoo-dios.
Yes.
You were a bit fired up. You were a little bit not puffed up, but you had opinions and you expressed them forcefully.
Yes, you too much for your So anyway, but I chose St. Peter's. I believe at the time it was managed by a German, white German, the leadership. And I believe that it was corruption free, and if I did well, I'll be selected. And so I chose St. Peter's over all the other options I had considered. Also because I was debating club president and Scripture Union president, and I had developed, from going around all these schools debating, I had developed high respect for students of St. Peter's, and I thought that was the best place to go. I ended up in St. Peter's, and I'm glad I did, over the others that I will mention in this room.
It would be unfair to them. Some grace it is, yes. They pale in comparison.
But at the time, I think St. Peter's used to produce about 40 of the 60 students who would go to Ghana Medical School. And there were about 66 form schools offering science, and St. Peter's alone would produce about 40, sometimes 48. And so for me, the statistics, the matter spoke for itself. So I chose.
But having that, even then, that particular focus on science, because of course now we very much know St. Peter's is one of the country's leading schools producing people in the STEM subjects. But you were always, you had your first sense of possibility through words, through the power of speech. You'd become part of the debating club. You discovered yourself through words and through reading. You were very motivated by words. And obviously education being a great advertisement, because it was a fair system, you were able to progress through it and then subsequently take your first degree, progress to study abroad. I wondered if this has marked the way you see the free senior high school policy in this country, apart from the fact of having been in the school, or Yawase Educhum having been in the school around the same time as you. If free SHS had been around when you were going to school, what difference do you think it could have made to the lives of the children you grew up with in Drassel?
Well, Nanaya, my twin brother was 2 years behind me going to secondary school because of money. My sister, Felicia's sister, Rose, did not go to secondary school.
Her twin sister.
Yes. The big sisters, Charlotte and Veronica, didn't go to secondary school. The biggest sister, Grace, her twin sister died, but Grace didn't go to secondary school. She went to Mansell's vocational school. I think she was the first school prefect of Mansell's in Kumasi. But in my year, there were just about 10 of us from big town Drassel who went to secondary school because the others just couldn't afford it. Of course, it was based on a scholarship. If you passed, you went on a scholarship, or you were fee paying, but sixth form was scholarship. So free SHS resonates with my soul. It's not a political statement. It is a necessary precondition for the development of this country. I think it's one of the boldest, clearest decisions that any government has this government has ever taken, but any government has ever taken on behalf of the state. I think that the clarity of thought with which the president has approached it is redeeming for Ghana. There are ongoing considerations or debates about how it can be refined, and that's proper. That's as it ought to be. That we should explore ways and means of improving whatever system we introduce and make it more accessible, more available, and better. There are people like Martha Brobe. Martha was the sharpest girl in the class. Martha never prospered in life. But I think Martha is one of those people who should have prospered. And whenever I see her in Drassel, for many years she was selling palm wine and all of that, my heart bleeds. If there was free SHS, if there was something better, opportunities better for the Marthas and others in my age cohort, I think it would be a better country than we are today. So to catapult the discussion into the present, I think that it's leapfrogging to have free SHS. I think it ought to be improved, but there ought not be the possibility of going back on free SHS.
Do you think it should remain universal, or will it have to become means tested just by virtue of the times in which we find ourselves, do you think?
not means tested, but there ought to be an opportunity for people like me to pay for my child's education. I had my 2 boys attend Mfansipim School. One attended at a time, they were just 2 years apart. One was fee paying and the other was free SHS. The fee paying guy just finished GIMPA Law. The one who benefited from free SHS is doing internship with Boeing in Ohio. He's a student at Asaase University, where he's the vice president of the student council.
My word.
Doing computer engineering. Now, I could have paid. My wife and I are lawyers. We are both sufficiently endowed, capable of paying for our child's or our children's education. Our daughter is at the Roman Ridge School. We can afford. We have 3 children in that sense. I have a child from a previous marriage, but between my wife Joyce and I, we have 3 children, and we could easily afford to pay for their education. I think we could be allowed to do that. But a means test has problems. The vicissitudes of life are too great and unpredictable, and one day you are able to afford and the other day you are unable, especially for those whose income dependency may be a little suspect. I'm simply saying that for those of us who can chart a trajectory of ability to pay, we should be allowed to pay, not subject to a rigorous means test, but ability. Also, if there is a possibility of creating a fund that enables people like you and I to make a contribution to free SHS fund, just that, voluntarily, or some foundation that enables us to contribute to the education of the children for the future, that we ought to be able, we ought to be enabled to do that. I've never given it a thought until this very minute that you've asked, but I think that there are potentially creative ways of sustaining free SHS that we ought to consider.
But for you, without question, it's a system that should be here and here to stay.
Yes, it has to be sustained.
Moving on to the question of your later training. Before you entered the law, first of all, you went to the University of Ghana and studied political science. Now, over and above the attraction of the words and the power of political rhetoric, what was it that attracted you to do that?
Okay, first of all, I actually wanted to do journalism, and the word journalism just fascinated me. I didn't know what it was, what it meant even when I was young. But when I was going to secondary school in 1972, I wanted to be a journalist. Then along the way, I fell in love with Shakespeare and Alexander Pope and John Keats, and I loved poetry. I loved the metaphysical poets and all of that. And I read Coriolanus with zeal, and well, of course, the Caesars and all of that. But I was literature shaped me, and so I was attracted to law. But I got aggregate 8 when I finished 6th form, and I didn't get law at the time. And my uncle, Patrick Chumesi, who was head of sociology, told me, never mind. Go do the sociology and political science and philosophy that they've given you. You can always do law later. It will make you smarter and all of that. And that's what I did. So I read sociology, and I'm glad I did. I think it's the most sensible course in the whole world, and I think everybody should read sociology. I rank it first among all subjects in the world, and I say that from a position of, from the perspective of someone who's read sociology up to a master's degree, and read political science, and read criminology. My PhD is in criminology, and I've read law. My first year courses were philosophy, sociology, and political science, and I majored in sociology and political science combined. So and I loved logic and all of that. But I think, and a bit of in my master's too, I read social psychology. My minor in my master's is social psychology. I read human ecology, I read anthropology, I read quite a few different things. And I have taught, I was the first male in Canada to teach women's studies in any university in Canada in 1988.
Wow.
At the University of, it's now Rhode Island University, but it used to be called Malaspina University College. So I've taught quite a few different courses in political science and public administration, and of course at GIMPA, and my professorship, by the way, is in governance and leadership, not law. A lot of people think that my professorship is in law. I was Dean of Law at Central University, founding Dean, but my professorship is in governance and leadership. Now, from all these diverse perspectives, I think a foundational course, if there's one course that I could prescribe to be made compulsory, it will be sociology. It's mind expanding. It opens up the apertures, the spaces in the mind. It makes people broad-minded, open to debate and to consideration of varied ideas. Properly studied, it tames stupidity. It moderates, exaggeration, and makes people a little more
just to talk about sociology a bit. At the Ghana Institute of Journalism, when they started the BA Communication Studies program, there was a combination of sociology, political science, and psychology. So when I did my BA in Communication Studies, for the first 2 years, I had to do sociology, political science, psychology for 2 years as part of the course. And of the three, the one I liked most was sociology. And not because of what you are saying, but that is what it was. Especially when we come to talk about social stratification. That was a different level of communication.
How classes work. So
just to emphasize on it. And then I also noticed, and I think you've spoken about it from your CV, that you actually went all the way to the PhD level in 1994 and then decided to go chase the law in 1998 to 2005. That sounds very interesting to me.
Yes. I pursued a career in criminology. I became a teacher, a professor in criminology. I advised the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, even when I was still a PhD student in West Vancouver, and I did research. I worked in the British Columbia Human Rights Commission as a commissioner for human rights. I'm the first Ghanaian to have been appointed in 1992, even before SHRAJ was formed, as a commissioner for human rights anywhere in the world. I came back to Ghana and helped to strengthen SHRAJ, build the structures, open offices, train people in adjudication, train lawyers in adjudication. Even at the time when I wasn't a lawyer, train people in mediation, in conflict resolution, and all of that. And the things I had done working with the Canadian Immigration and Refugee Board and other institutions. But the point is, when I came to Ghana, everybody was asking, hey, are you a lawyer? Are you a lawyer? And it was a difficult question to answer. I wasn't a lawyer, but I had been an adjudicator. My decisions were still, even now, if you Google, my decisions are still relied some of them have set a precedent in Canada in human rights and all of that. And so I decided that I had always wanted to be a lawyer after a couple of incidents that I can share with you growing up. And so it was time. I came to Ghana in January 98. I arrived on the 10th of January 98. And I went to the law school and inquired. And the law school exams were taking place 3 days later. So I registered. And I wrote the exam. And Yawodu Ayabuafo and I, of Daily Graphic fame,
head of the National Media Commission,
former editor,
now he's the NMC boss.
Yes. Yao Bodu and I got 70% each, and we topped the class. The exam. And so that's how I entered.
What was this system like? Are you talking about entering into the Ghana School of Law?
Ghana School of Law.
Direct. You didn't have to go to faculty.
No.
Okay.
At that time,
it's just 98.
98. That was the practice. So I.
And how many years would you spend there to become?
Ordinarily, you would spend 4 years. You do 2 years the part 1 and 2 years the professional. But in my case, I've had a funny. I followed a funny trajectory. I entered law school, Makola, as they call it, in 98, September, October. And then the following year, my boss, Justice Emil Shraj, had a lot of responsibilities, traveling a lot. And I was a director of operations and chief investigator, and I had to stop law school for 1 year. And so I deferred for 1 year. When I went back, I went back in, I think, 2099 or no, I entered 98. So I went back 2000. And Kisie Jabin and Godfrey Dami, yes,
including Gabi Asayoche.
Yes, no, Gabi was my mate when I started in 98.
Okay.
Then I deferred, so he became my senior. But when I went back, then I joined the Kisi Ejabin and Godfrey Dami and the others. And so that's the 2003 group. Then President Kufuor appointed me as Executive Secretary of the National Reconciliation Commission. So I deferred law school a second time, and went to serve for 2 years. And so when I went back in 2005, then people I just mentioned had become my seniors, and so I then graduated in 2005.
So you were called to the bar in Ghana 2005.
2005, okay. Yes, instead of 2002. Yes,
or even 2003.
Or even 2003.
Because you deferred the first time, it would have brought you to 2002 if you didn't defer.
Exactly.
And then all right.
So I have seniors, I have classmates, 3 sets. So I'm on 3 different law school platforms.
You know the reason why I'm asking. The reason why I'm asking,
Anna, is because
about
the business of the notary public.
Recently, when the notary publics were appointed, I saw that different levels of people were associated with Professor Attafuah. So I asked, and then he told me, but I still have not been clear until today.
Yes.
So now the clarity is here.
We have the full explanation of how that took place. And just in keeping with the Catholic range of subjects that you had studied as well, as you said, broadening the mind, following in the footsteps of a certain Honourable Professor Kofi Abrifai-Bozier as well, studying sociology, but you've been exposed to a huge range of subjects, and equally a very wide range of people. I wondered, you spoke there touching on your appointment by President Kufuor to become Executive Secretary of Ghana's National Reconciliation Commission. At a rather, if you like, fraught time in our history, it was just after the first exchange of power from one political party to one of the opposing side in the Fourth Republic, and it was seen to be a time when there were many incidents of the past that had not been laid to rest, and we needed a mechanism, some way of doing this. Now, just for the sake of clarity, had you, before your appointment to the National Reconciliation Commission in Ghana, you hadn't had your experience in Liberia, had you?
No.
How did you find that experience of, if you like, overseeing the NRC, and what did you learn from going through that? I mean, we all remember seeing the broadcasts on TV.
Well, thank you. That's an interesting story behind that. I was I'd taken my leave from Shraj, accumulated leave, and I was helping the Tanzania, the Republic of Tanzania, to set up a commission on human rights and good governance.
Right.
I was helping to draft their law. I wasn't a lawyer then, but I was helping to draft their law and train their commissioners and, do the interviews and all of that. Then I got a call from, incidentally, the current president, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, who was Attorney General. He'd taken my number from Professor Jima Bwedi of CDD Ghana, who was a friend of mine, still is.
I noticed that he's a referee on your CV.
Yes. The 3 key influencers, if I May beyond my wife, Joyce. Professor Jima Bwedi, Pastor Mensa Otabil, Reverend Dr. Mensa Otabil, who blessed my marriage, and Dr. Muhammadu Baumia, my friend. These are the three key persons, but professionally, Professor Yanka, Central University, others. But whenever I need advice, whenever I want to be spoken to beyond reaching out to my God, the humans that I have needed to speak with have been these three people.
Wow.
That's not politics. That's just human. Jima Bwedi, difficult decisions, career-wise and that sort of thing. Marriage, Dr. Mensa Otabil. This is Joyce. This is the woman I want to marry. What do you think? That's the go-to person, you know. And Mahmoud, as we call him, Dr. Muhammadu Baumia.
Yes. DMB.
DMB. What is this path, you know? And let's talk. The person to speak with or to on a very deep personal level. Those are the people. But to come back to your question, so I got a call from Nana Akufo-Addo and said the president wants to speak with you, and I was in Dodoma, which is the political capital of Tanzania at the time. Well, yes. And the president said, Dr. Attafuah, your country needs you. I want you to come home. And he told me what it was. And it was to come and serve as executive secretary of the National Reconciliation Commission. And this was at a cabinet meeting where people had lobbied strongly, and a particular candidate was being pushed very strongly. And what I understand from the current president, then Attorney General, was that President Kufuor was quiet during the deliberations and said, oh, what about that short chap at Shraj? I think he'll be the best fit for this job. And then they all agreed. Papa Uso Ankoma, Nana Akufo-Addo, all of them at the table, and then they placed a call.
So there was consensus on the choice.
There was consensus. And I left there, I think the call was on a Thursday. I left on a Friday. I got here on Sunday. And on Monday, the 6th of May, 2002, the commission was commissioned. The National Reconciliation Commission was inaugurated.
What you were doing in Tanzania?
I was setting up the Tanzania's national, they call it Commission on Human Rights and Good Governance.
The equivalent of Shraj.
The Shraj. Okay. But instead of Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, they call it Commission on Human Rights and Good Governance. And it was a consultancy, a UNDP consultancy that Justice Emil Short, who was the commissioner for Ghana, had secured, and we were there.
And so with the call, you just abandoned everything and just came back to your country?
Oh, yes. It was a call to come and serve. And what I was doing in Dodoma was actually presenting the bill for their commission. And I worked through the night. As soon as I got the call, I spoke with the chairman. I worked through the entire night and did the presentation to their parliament. They accepted it. No amendments. It was, we were serious people. I've always been serious.
And so the path was cleared for you to
cleared.
Your job was done in Tanzania.
And I just we drove from Dodoma to Dar es Salaam, and I boarded a flight and came to Ghana.
It's interesting that he says that the former President Kufuor said, what about that short man? And then the one who placed the call was also a short man.
Well, the history of short men in Ghana politics, there could be like a whole study written about that, which perhaps we shouldn't get into.
But that short chap, the short chap at Shraj. Yes. So that's how I got my appointment. I didn't lobby for that, and I came, and I think at the end of the day, your question was, what did I learn from it? Every year I give a lecture at the Ghana Armed Forces Command and Staff College on reconciliation. It's work in progress. I've waited for so long to see what books come out, but I've been too busy to write. I have pages and chapters to put together on national reconciliation. I will do so in good time as soon as I'm able to.
You have a bit of breathing space.
Separate from the National Identification Authority. I will put my thoughts together on the national reconciliation. But I say this to the glory of God. The NRC encountered so much opposition, so much resistance from then party in opposition, the National Democratic Congress, Rawlings and all of that.
Because, of course, a lot of the proceedings were seen to relate to the PNDC precursor.
Because the focus was on unconstitutional rule. The human rights violations and atrocities perpetrated during periods of unconstitutional rule between 1957 and 1993. Even though in practice we also looked at periods of constitutional rule, so we looked at Buzia's period and all of that, the Salah case and those things, but the focus was predominantly on military rule, and there was a lot of resistance and and a lot of challenges. But at the end of the day, when Gabi Asare Ochridako, Mr. Alhaji Abu Ramadan, Mrs. Samira Baumia's father, and Dr. Tony Edu, and Mr. Haruna Idrisu, recently the minority leader, and I met on Good Evening Ghana with Mr. Paul Adumochiri. Dr. Tony Edu actually said that the National Reconciliation Commission had done a fantastic job. His verdict was that we had held the country high. We had done a yeoman's job despite all the criticisms and the challenges and all of that. We had generally been fair. I think the international observer community's judgment was even kinder, despite some, it was a human institution, and some of the commentaries by some of the commissioners sometimes either demonstrated lack of attention or inadequate attention or pedestrian viewpoints and all of that. But those are, to be expected to some extent. But by and large, we did a good job. We held the country together. We cemented the unity of this country. Our recommendations were fair. We gave fair opportunity to people to ventilate, to unburden themselves. And that is what the Attorney General then and Minister for Justice, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, had said, that the National Reconciliation Commission was to provide a platform for people to release the pent-up energies, all the pain that had been bottled up within them and all of that, and to release the energy so that we can contribute to development. And I think we provided that platform. We enabled people who were in exile to come home. We provided restitution to the extent possible. And even though we couldn't return people to the state in which they were, you can never do that, restore people to the status quo ante. But we did the best. The reparations were inadequate. I think the highest reparation was about 10 million Ghana cedis in those days when we finished our work in 2004 and gave our report in October 2004 to President Kufuor. One thing he said when we handed the report to him, even before he opened the report, was that he was not going to implement any recommendation about prosecution, and that he would leave it to the consciences of the people who were the alleged perpetrators. And apart from some newspapers taking advantage of it to sell, get a bit of, leaking pages here and there, government in 2004, before the 2004 elections, election was December, report was given in, election was in December. The report was given to the president in December. And those 2 months, the NPP government did not make political capital out of the NRC report,
so
even though
the report, you said the report was given in December.
No,
it was, the report would have been given earlier.
The report was given in October. In October,
okay.
But the elections were in December. But the government did not make political capital out of it. It was as if nothing had happened. And it was one of the best things. It saved this country. Our recommendations, the recommendations of the commission, I was executive secretary, but Justice Amosechi's commission did an excellent job. I mean, those who are alive, Professor Mensah Bonsu, Henrietta of the Supreme Court. Professor Florence Dolphine, Mr. The former TUC boss, the name escapes me just this minute. But, you know, all these people, some of them have passed on. Of course, General Eskin, Ubo Dalafula Bao II. And then we have Mrs. Sylvia Boy, who is alive. She was a member of the commission. All these eminent citizens, and of course we had the emir of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Mission, who was one of the members of the commission.
Our producer was suggesting, was it Mr. Idua Mankwa, who is the TUC boss you're referring to?
No, the one before then.
Okay.
Just a shame.
Never mind.
Yeah, I'll capture that in a minute. But all these wonderful people, 9 of them, commission members, served, and they brought their collective wisdom and experience to the benefit of this nation, and help chart a path that help people to come out and tell the truth from their perspective, and for some perpetrators to admit to wrongdoing and to seek forgiveness and reconciliation. There were some dramatic moments of reconciliation on the floor of the old Parliament House. I remember brokering a reconciliatory moment in my office between Mr. B.T. Baba, who was a senior director in the Ghana Prison Service, and one of those soldiers who claimed to have been tortured by prison officers, including himself or some of his lieutenants, and then coming to the floor and making peace, and him apologizing. It was one of the greatest moments, but it was also the platform that enabled Kwabena J. Ejapon to come and tell the story of his father, Kweku Baako, Benepson, and all these great journalists to talk about their experiences of torture. Tremi Jan, who was a brother to Jan Rawlins's number 2, Wachijan, you know, a whole set of issues.
There's one story that I remember of a military officer who told his story, and he told the story, I don't remember his name, but he told the story such that he was arrested, he was sent to the BNI office at 37, he was moved from there in a car, he was like, he was covered, he was in a boot, and then while they were going, because of his knowledge of Accra, he was following the route with which the car was going. So when the car came out of the building there, he followed, he took the turn to the right, went down, negotiated, came back up to 37 roundabout, and then they turned to the left. And he was telling that story, and that is how he got to know exactly where he was being sent. So by the time they arrived there, he says that by instinct, even though he was in a boot covered and everything, he could tell that I am here at this location. I've forgotten the name of the person, but that was a very intriguing story during the reconciliation.
I think there were lots of very vivid personal accounts that came out of that hearing, as you said, broadcast live on national television, perhaps following a precedent set by South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which had also been seen as a very important nationally cathartic exercise for post the first all race elections there. So perhaps some lessons learned from South Africa, but adapted for the Ghanaian situation.
Exactly, Nana. We studied the South African situation. We visited. We took some lessons, but we crafted a home-based legislation. I was one of those people involved in drafting the legislation. Indeed, I think, CDD Ghana, Professor Jimabuedi's CDD Ghana, played a pivotal role in the establishment of this commission because it organized a national conference on reconciliation at Busua Beach, at which a lot of lawyers and judges, that's where I met Justice Samuel Sechi for the first time, and Justice Mabel Bamful and a whole lot of them, some of the people who are on the Supreme Court at the moment, and the current president later. And I think I was a rapporteur and assisted in drafting. And so when the Attorney General then needed a draft framework crafted, he approached me and asked me to prepare a draft paper for cabinet consideration. I think that was the impetus. And even though His Excellency the President didn't know that I had drafted it, just coincidentally, as I said, he had mentioned that I should be considered for the position. Right. But the President had asked me to create that, and I did over a 5-day period from Thursday to Monday, and that became the framework for the implementation of the National Reconciliation Commission. But I had taken account of what had happened in South Africa. And when the commission started, it also officially studied the South African situation. Right. We got help from an institution called International Center for Transitional Justice in New York. And they brought experiences from other countries like East Timor and South Africa and what was happening in other places in Peru and the rest of them. There were about 6 countries at the time that were going through transitional justice issues, including Sierra Leone. So we learned lessons from some of them, and then we also were later on able to impart. And I, for example, was able to help with the Truth Commission in Kenya, in Togo, in Liberia, and even at the time, Liberia. I was there for a whole year working for the Truth Commission there. So we learned some useful lessons from them, but ours was also homegrown. Our law did not mimic any particular country. We thought that the South African one was problematic because they offered truth for amnesty. So if you come and tell the truth, then you were forgiven your trespasses. There are many countries that have not found that problematic. In our case, that's not what we did. Ours was not truth for freedom, but we crafted a homegrown one. Nobody got prosecuted, but we think that by and large, we got the truth established. Some people just wanted to know what happened to their loved ones. Some people wanted to know whether their loved ones were actually dropped from helicopters into the sea, or that they were buried alive and all of that. And then people came and told gory stories horrendous stories of what had happened, what they saw, how their loved ones were tortured in their presence, or how their shops were looted by their own neighbors, and the wickedness of the average Ghanaian toward the average Ghanaian. One of the most shocking lessons is that we are not very kind people. We are not very nice, even though we think of ourselves as better than Nigerians and better than your next door neighbor will loot your own items, even though you get up every morning at 3. You light the fire, you prepare the cocoa, you do all of that and sell. But when the soldiers come and say, "Don't call me," and they are selling your wares in your shop at ridiculously discounted prices, it is your own neighbors who will line up, queue, and come and buy at ridiculous prices.
As Archbishop Gabriel Palmer-Buckle said, it took that experience for me to realize that the Ghanaian too can be a wolf to his neighbor. But just to remind our listeners...
And I'm glad you mentioned Palmer-Buckle. He was seen as more or less a deputy chair of the commission. He was
a very famous,
very revered.
voice.
Yes,
Is the name you were
coming out
trying
of
to
it.
remember? Christian
Apiagyei.
Apiagyei,
Christian
of the
Apiagyei. That's the
TUC.
name I was trying to
Right.
remember. Yes.
It looks like we've
Very-
not gone into NIA. And all
Well,
that. We're
I
already
was just
running
going
out
to
of time.
say, just to remind our listeners that this segment is brought to you courtesy of MetaTime Blockchain Technologies, the world's most comprehensive blockchain ecosystem. You can join MetaTime in Ghana this coming month to discuss prospects of blockchain technology and the use of CDBC. MetaTime, the new standard. But yes, as Wilberforce was suggesting there, we have got so engrossed in the National Reconciliation Commission that we haven't yet even touched on your role as the Executive Secretary of the National Identification Authority. Now, you have come under a certain amount of fire, I think it can be said with fairness, Professor Attafuah,
Yes.
by various people in high places, principally people associated with the New Patriotic Party, both politicians and party officials or party sympathizers, for the way you have run the NIA. But before we get on to any questions of, if you like, the political complications which may have perhaps, dogged you in your role, the Ghana card being the key thing that you sought to introduce as a way of establishing people's presence in this country, their nationality, who is a Ghanaian, and where they are. Can you tell us what you think you've been able to achieve? I know you've been in the studio on numerous occasions to give us updates about how many people are enrolled on the Ghana card, but what you think the significance is of the introduction of the Ghana card system?
I think the most significant thing about the Ghana card system is the enhancement of the scale of integrity, decency, truthfulness in our country. Through the National Identification System, we are establishing a single source of truth in identity management. We've got to know who we are, who every single person is, and there got to be only a single person. You were born once, and you are once, you live once. There is no reason to have multiple identities, multiple dates of birth. We have a request on my desk of a PhD holder who claims he was born in 1962 and has a birth certificate to prove it. He also has a birth certificate to prove that he was born in 1972. And he also has a birth certificate to prove that he was born in 1968. And then he has school, university degree, the master's degree, the application form which proves that he was born in 1965. And he wants us to affirm one of these days that make him youngest, 1972. You have people who have Austrian or German or Dutch nationalities and are also Ghanaian when the laws of those countries do not permit them to have dual citizenship. Then they come to Ghana and they don't want to pay $120 US to get a foreigner identification card, the Ghana card for foreigners. They want the free one because of $120. So they will come and lie that they are, or conceal the fact that they are nationals of those three, any of those three countries. And then when they get caught, then they will say that NIA made a mistake and gave them
The wrong date of birth.
Yes, give them a Ghana card. A Ghana card instead of a foreigner card.
Yeah.
The dishonesty. Now, what a national identification system establishes for any country is a dependable system of identifying a person biometrically, that is through fingerprints, through iris, that is their facial, the picture, and through their iris, their eyes, so that there can be no doubt at all, indubitability. There's no doubt about your identity as Nanaya. Then it is combined with alphanumeric information, biometrics and alphanumeric. So date of birth, mother's name, father's name, those kinds of information. And we linking it up with the births and deaths registry. We're going to begin on the 1st of July to register all newborns from age 0. We will reach a point where from age 0 to infinity, every person living in this country would be captured in our national database, existing once. When you are 18, it will be known that you are 18. When you are 60, it will be known. There will be no more arguments about identity before voting. There will be no arguments about age before voting. There will be no arguments about citizenship before voting. All of those things will be a thing of the past. And football age also will be a thing of the past. All these things will improve the scale of integrity in our country. You go to the bank, you do a transaction. The banks are required by law since 2012 to require your Ghana card. A lot of people didn't have it. Now we have 17.4 million Ghanaians enrolled onto the National Identity Register. We have 16.3 million people, 16.4 million people holding the cards in their hands. There are some stubborn academy,
individuals,
members,
yes,
who have not gone. The leader of the stubborn academy went to NIA 2 weeks ago from Parliament to go and get his card. My own
He
good
did?
friend. Yes, he did.
Oh,
finally.
he shall remain
Yes.
nameless.
He shall remain nameless. But
Yes.
he made a call and he went and he got his card.
We're very pleased for him.
Yes, but a lot of people, those who registered between, let's say, July last year and February this year, we had, for financial reasons, we'd run out of blank cards. But we went to Parliament on the 28th of February. Parliament approved, the Ministry of Finance released money, and all those backlog cards have been printed and sent to the regional and district offices.
From where they will be distributed.
So
to.
people must go there. Now, you use an interesting word, distributed. Now, in our system, it is biometrically issued so that we know that it has gone to you, the applicant. So it cannot be given to your neighbor to bring to you, or your mother or your wife or husband. You must apply your fingerprint to the machine and the card is issued. So individuals must go to the office.
Right.
Nana, we were at their registration centers. We were using the registration, the polling stations last used by the Electoral Commission during the mass registration. And a lot of people did not go for their cards, even though the cards were there. Now the cards have been taken to the district and regional offices. We plead with them to go for their cards. There are about 17 things that you cannot do in Ghana if you do not have the card. Mandatory uses of the Ghana card. The SIM card re-registration was one, yes. But beyond SIM card, you cannot get a passport, you cannot get a driver's license, you cannot get a pension plan, you cannot
maintain a bank account,
you cannot operate a bank account, you can't do any banking transaction.
So we think now, because of practical reasons, we have reached the point where, whether people like it or not, the Ghana card is going to become an accepted part of our culture.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, our time very, very, very fast spent. We could have carried on talking to you. We got a little bit of a sense there of what post-National Identification Authority you might be interested in doing. We know that you had your term there extended as Executive Secretary for a couple of years, but you will possibly be retiring in November this year.
Yes.
But we know you want to write books. We hope you will tell us a lot about your previous record, and also extend, we didn't even mention your book on fighting armed robbery in Ghana, of much topical interest, but extend on the body of knowledge and experience that you have to offer the people of Ghana, and perhaps even beyond that, just briefly, apart from this wonderful career that you've described to us, what would you want to be remembered for in one sentence?
I want to be remembered for my integrity.
Add your favorite artist. to your response. Your favorite artist. And there are some messages on Facebook that will read for
yes,
you
which we'll have to describe to Prof after the end of the program, unfortunately.
Very well.
But you won an award for being the Outstanding Public Service Chief Executive Officer 2022. Above and beyond that, what would you like to be remembered for?
I'd like to be remembered for my integrity in public service. It is the one thing I've held on to very dearly. The Presbyterian training I got from Draso has stayed with me all my life. It helped me in my years in Canada, and Canada helped to hone my values. I had them, but they deepened the values. And when I buckled up on the plane, returning to Ghana on the 10th of January 1998, I vowed that I'll keep my standards of integrity, my values, my honesty, my decency, and I have done so. So I have made a lot of enemies. I have people who cannot take what I stand for, but I would rather die with those than succumb to the pressures that they bring on me. I've done nothing wrong. There's not a single day I wake up wondering if I did anything wrong, because I purpose in my heart to do the right thing every single day, to serve this country to the best of my abilities. And I think that it is the essence of patriotism. I try to exemplify it. Those who work with me know that I stand for the best. I hold the highest values, and I'm coherent, I'm focused, and I'm determined to serve my country as best as any human being could ever do. I don't think that, or rather, to put it positively, I think that every single day I do right by my country and for my country.
Spoken like a true patriot, words of integrity from Professor Ken Attafuah. Thank you so much for being our guest on the Road to Greatness, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us on the Asaase Breakfast Show. Join us again, same time next morning. Coming up now, the 10 o'clock news, a little past the hour, and then followed by Asaase Cafe. Thanks for joining in.
Thank you for watching. Like, comment, share, and subscribe.